the last, I'm gonna try and get this underailed. Last couple of episodes, we've been talking about the character creation
Yeah.
part, and I think in this episode of Fiction Factory, let's look into, I think, a good healthy blend of some of the mechanical side with skills. You can tell my screen lit up because I have the Word document open, of looking at skills, advantages, and disadvantages, and
Well,
kind of how those
so
play in with lore, I
yeah.
think.
Well, so let's segue from how we ended last time. We had just started talking about the main attributes of a character and like how.
Right.
So let's. I think we should start with that because we kind of were rushing ourselves out because like, oh, the hour's up. It's like 5, 4, 3. It's like we got this. Mac, move
Seriously.
that. Move.
Okay,
So
so we had talked about like the reflex and cool and magnetism and stuff like that.
so these are the things that make up who your character is in like a. We're basically trying to say, okay, you got your character concept. Now, how do they affect the world around them, right?
Right.
Because you've got strength. How strong are you? You've got reflexes. How do you react when someone hits you on the knee with a little rubber mallet? Uh, you've got your now the one that's kind of interesting that we added was magnetism.
I
Uh,
love magnetism.
because and I remember you. This is again. I want to kind of bring back what we were talking about before, with charisma and other games, which is just like a hey, do you seduce this person? Like that's what charisma is. But magnetism, like once talk about how we came about with that because that's something we added to the game after what 6 months or so of playing it. We started looking at it at the CRB or the core rule book and really started to think about it.
The well, magnetism was an addition to because we were how it even started was the system itself was kind of flat. Like we had numbers here, numbers there, not really much that spoke to kind of the natural ordered chaos that goes with like people, like in general. And we got hooked into this whole thing where it was, uh, how do we determine? Because all stats are is just ways of saying, hey, this person's capable of da 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 da, or they have an aptitude in, and that's all that breaks down to. But we had, what was it? We had attractiveness originally. That's what it started with. We had attractiveness,
Right.
and we couldn't figure out how to redescribe what attractiveness really is, and that was kind
Well,
of
because we were like, what's attracted to one person might be attracted,
right. It was
off-putting to
way
another person, and
yeah, it was way too kind of like assumption based. It was sort of like, oh, you're attractive to everybody, which is kind of what the problem with charisma is. Because we have cool, which is the
right.
the outgoing, like how you put yourself off. Like how cool are you under pressure, and how cool are you perceived by others? Because the lower the cool, the less the less cool you seem to everyone else around you. I mean, that's a polarized stat to say the least. Magnetism is the same kind of polarization, except for instead of being extruded outward, it is pulled inward. It's like how well can you draw everybody in? I use the
Or repulse them.
yeah, it's a social gravity well. It's one of those things where it's like, do you pull people in or do they become like automatically repelled because you're just not that kind of you're not magnetic. So in other words, they just kind of pass you by. It's almost like the other pole in that one is neutrality. It's just kind of like I don't know, he's just a guy. Like if you have no magnetism and then it kind of like the spectrum goes the other way. Um,
We
Yeah,
had examples, I think, that we were talking about, like, for you could have someone who is very intelligent, like book smart, but not, doesn't have like street smarts, right? So
yeah.
with the magnetism, you could have someone who is very attractive, but they're like slimy, essentially, and that, you know, nobody wants to be around them. Or you could have a person who's, not as physically attractive, like a Hunchback of Notre Dame sort of situation,
But
where,
still bring people around them.
but very genuine people want to, like once they get past that exterior, they're like, oh yeah, you're really
The
cool.
retching. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to hang out with you, like that sort of thing. So it's, it's that sort of thing that I think, and I really like the idea of magnetism, that it could be someone who's not necessarily, they could just be like gruff and short with people and just not very approachable. So they're a perfectly nice person, but just people are like, "Ugh, I don't want that guy coming to lunch with us, or I don't want to invite him to the party. They're the walking buzzkill, you know. They walk into the room and suck the air out of it, like that sort of situation. So, but I think it's a really unique stat. When I started playing D&D, we had, comeliness, which was like, again, very attraction based. How like physically attractive are you, or how much are people attracted to you, want to be with you, be around you, whatever. And then so much of that trope of like, bard, I have a high charisma that I'm going to weaponize to get rapey.
Seduce the dragon.
And even worse, it's like
it's rapey.
The next demographic anyway is going to use that old-fashioned terminology like comeliness. Like it's just going to complete, like it doesn't work. Like
right.
So to go through the rest of these stats, they're kind of self-explanatory. Tech is like you said, just how much you can, your aptitude for technical stuff. Mobility
That's
is
the Machines, that movie.
Oh, what? You're talking Mitchell versus
dad.
Machines.
Yes.
Yeah.
The dad is very smart. Zero tech.
Yeah. But the Mitchells versus the Machines.
Yep.
Yes.
I'm glad you guys enjoyed that movie.
Oh my gosh. That was perfect.
My youngest had a complete aneurysm. She's like, "You want to watch it?" I'm like, "Yeah."
Mobility is super simple to understand too. It just is like, how far can you move? Now, what's interesting is that I don't think in all the time we've played the game we've ever I think maybe twice we've said, you've asked what's your mobility, and then that decided, because we're close to the fights tend to happen pretty closely. But it's how far can you move in a particular round, and in this game rounds happen in 3 seconds. So how far can you move in 3 seconds?
Well, we did have some situations where we were trying to escape a blast radius.
That's true.
Or building falling on us, where I know that I said, "Hey, this is where my mobility is. Can I?" Because my character is not necessarily mundane, but is not magical at all. Can't grow wings or teleport or anything like that. And so I was like, "How fast can I get to the other side of the whatever?"
Yeah.
And that I like that. What I think. Jumping, though, is also tied to mobility, and I like
a little bit of that plus your strength too, right? Your body.
So I like that it has that, and that it's different from reflex, again, because other systems have just flat out dexterity and a fixed movement speed for everybody. So having mobility be a stat that you can put in, that, I mean, you could make yourself a very fast character.
Yeah.
That is not otherwise physically imposing, that could, dart around and cast spells or something like that, And then we have the opposite end of it, where you have Ivar, the character
super slow.
Drew plays, that is super slow, and that's part of the character. Is that he, and we played mobility on that a lot, where it's like, okay, we got to get to the next scene, and
we'll
it's like,
he's
dragging, or he's teleporting.
Yeah.
Because he can't walk very fast.
Well, you also get the same situation whenever you've got the opposites, where it's the fat guy who can run really fast for some reason. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that in real life, but it's weird. Sometimes dudes be all kinds of chonk, and then they just go. It's like, wow.
I mean, you see a cat that's major chonk, and they just
Or you get a rhino that can hit 40 miles an hour. That's a
But see,
tank.
that's a big animal.
It is. But I mean, that it's a tank. That it is not a cheetah. It's not lithe. But it can move.
So one of the things we talked about extensively last time was luck. So the special character attributes. After we go past body and empathy, which we also talked about last time, luck is super important in this game. What's interesting about luck, if you're thinking about from a storyteller's point of view, is it lets you as a character kind of get that plot armor if you wanted. Because if you're about to get hit by something, and you rolled and the dice said that you're going to die, that you could actually just I'm going to try that again. and
Just
then you can
gonna
roll it again.
nudge fate a little bit in the right direction.
That's really what it is. And I think that I obviously don't have as much experience in other games as you guys do, but luck feels unique. Like being able to re-roll dice or being able to nudge dice in another direction. In most games, once the dice leaves your hand, you're done. Like whatever rolls is what it is. But in Shadows, it makes it cinematic because there's been a few times where we use luck
Yes.
and it. I remember I think it was Ivar or
Turn the
Drew.
freaking tide.
It was a 1 he rolled and he will die, and then he rolled again with the luck and he got a 10 and which exploded, which means he gets to roll it again and add that result to his tally, and so it was a crit success at that point. So it went from the worst possible outcome to still bad but not dead.
D, have you played anything in Fate, in the Fate system?
Not in Fate, but they do use
Like Fate points, right? Is what I'm thinking of.
Yes, I've done so. I've played in systems that have it. Like hero points are kind of the same thing in D&D. Then you've got like Fate points
Right.
inside of Warhammer 40K because they gonna have that as well. But it's very stingy the way that they do it. It does not
Yeah.
have quite such a large pool that you can mess with, and it doesn't really have it's not an economy that regenerates itself like this. Like this is like, hey, you want to play it on hard mode. If you're stuck in a combat encounter, your luck doesn't regenerate until after the combat encounter's over if you're having to bounce through sessions. But most of the time, it won't hold until the session's over and then come back. And that's the difference, weirdly enough, is that it kind of regenerates. But a lot of systems are
You have
super...
to rest, right? You've
Yeah.
been able to
Yeah.
gather yourself back up.
Gather
Yep.
yourself, yeah.
Yeah, and I like having the
So-
players be the focus of why the luck regenerates as opposed to the actual characters, because it makes it seem more chaotic in game. They can't really pinpoint why. It's just like, worked this time, don't know why that time. Like,
Yeah.
Well, and there are
and
times
then-
you burn those luck points and you don't get a better outcome.
yeah,
Right? Like, or you're literally out of luck. But
Yeah.
I think that's a good segue, if we're ready, Ken, to advantages and disadvantages.
are we ready, Ken?
Are we ready?
Well, let's really quick before we jump in there. Because there's a few other sanity is another stat that I haven't heard about much. What's interesting is that
Only Call of Cthulhu is the only thing I know with sanity.
the only game I've ever heard of that had sanity was like the Amnesia games, where like if you saw the monster, your screen would start getting like weird.
Oh yeah. Oh my
but,
gosh, I remember that.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Sanity is so. D, could you describe why we have sanity in Shadows and what it's used for?
Well, I mean, if you wanted to have yet another dimension of your character that is susceptible to flaws, that's probably one of the biggest things. I don't know, messing with flaws is kind of what Shadows does. Like, having the advantages is great, but it's the disadvantage and the flaw that really makes that sort of like pop by its contrast. So sanity is necessary because there's a couple of things. When it was adapted from Cyberpunk 2020, it existed because you needed to calculate what was referred to as humanity loss, which is still in this. Humanity loss is whenever you got a bunch of cybernetics and you started to become less human, therefore it fucked with your sanity and made you less and less, well, normal.
It can make you get cyberpsychosis.
Yeah, cyberpsychosis, correct. Which then they would send out the cyberpsycho squads, have you painted all over the street walls, and that'd be the end of that. So sanity was important in that respect, but what Shadows does with it is something way more bent. More often than not, if you suffer an attack to your will, it could be through spell working, supernatural incursions. It could be a natural circumstance of just regular trauma. Anything that could
Regular trauma.
Yeah.
Sure.
Just
The world
arm.
of Shadows.
Yeah.
Is it just regular trauma or like supernatural trauma?
It's just
Just
like-
regular trauma.
Fucking mundane. So like what kind of trauma is it doesn't necessarily matter per se. It's the challenge. It's the check against you suddenly having this snap and becoming completely. I mean, insanity is just kind of this massive state of unreliability. If you really want to look at it in its bare bones structuring, like you become
How it affects the mechanics, yeah.
Well, I mean, just like people, like actual people, like what insanity
fair.
really is just a massive state of unreliability. But yeah, I mean, like it's a massive state of unreliability. So, obviously with a bunch of pain and other colorful glitter things thrown in there that, Call of Cthulhu style stuff. So what it does is it gauges whether or not you're able to sustain yourself against something like that. So if your character gets, slammed with something that completely turns his worldview upside down, they have to check their own sanity, pun kind of intended. They have to check their own sanity to make sure that they can handle it, because when people have any kind of belief system that's heavily rooted, you jerk that out from underneath them, they start getting fucking weird. And that's what sanity is representing in this. Your character kind of goes a little bit like if something really screwed up happens. In particular, like one of the biggest examples where sanity is kind of important is that in the presence of other werewolves, especially mid-change, they have to make a sanity check, and those who are less higher up on the will side of things, if they suffer that kind of exposure, they will end up thinking that they've had some massive delusion. And it's because of the natural spell working that protects the werewolf from more or less being seen as something real. So if a werewolf is to transform in front of somebody who has no idea the supernatural world exists, they will go mad for a short period of time. And whenever they come out of it, they'll be like, I don't know what the fuck that was, but a gigantic-ass wolf is what it looked like to me, but I had to have been hallucinating. It literally causes them to distrust everything they saw and experienced.
They gaslight themselves, yeah.
Yeah.
So we had that situation early with my character Barrick, who had lived, understanding that cybernetics were a thing, but not having any, exposure to vampires, werewolves, outsiders. Like none of those things were real to him. They were only perhaps in movies.
Right.
And so when we had that situation with his first, I think, glance at an outsider, some sort of eldritch horror, that he went to like full combat paralysis. That was like,
yeah,
I have no idea what to do with this.
Right.
And I think that it just adds a little bit of chance to the game. And I do like, we talked about this last session, you can never have 100% sanity.
No.
Right.
Yeah, there's nobody who's 100%
Right.
sane, because I would consider them absolutely mad if they were. Like, it's one of those
So I
things where it's
think
like
you can get to 95%,
Yes.
right? So
maximum. Doesn't matter if you've got like a 20 empathy, you're still at 95% sanity.
yeah.
Yeah.
So willpower, I really like too.
Yeah, so let's talk on the other side of things. So you got your sanity, which is just your how well do you handle, whatever, and what's the kind of Richter scale of your brain, right? And your willpower is what's backed up by that, right?
So will is a representation of your capacity to. It's a defensive measure, just like sanity is. The only thing is that if you were to look at it in its layered form, you have willpower, which is kind of your first defense against an active attacker. Will is usually used, but it's also used as a form of offense as well. So if you're using magical spells against another entity, it's your will against theirs. So it's a much more flexible statistic, but it's also something that can be used on the offensive and defensive. And what happens is that when something really truly gets down to the core of a character, and like I said, their belief structure root, whatever that is, which again comes right back to, you better have a really damn concise character concept, because whatever is holding them together probably ain't much, and you have to know what those things are, because the sanity part will come into it and they will kind of go rubber bandy nuts depending on what's going on. So, but if the will fails, like the will is standing over the top of it, it's kind of like a you may succeed against an offensive attack in the will, but that attack can cause the character to kind of go bang and get bent, which is why you need that sanity check afterwards. So, but will is there as kind of the offense defense. It's the proactive instead of the passive.
And it also is how you kind of break into. One of the reasons, Scott, I wanted to go over these last few things is that we need to know about will and sanity to talk about the advantages and disadvantages. But
Agreed.
will is really important because it also goes into custom mechanics that we'll talk about in another session. It also goes into how magic works. What you just talked about is defensive. Like when someone tries to attack you magically, you need to have a good, strong will or good rolls in those wills to survive that or to combat it. But also, when you want to exert your will upon the world, you need to have that power as well.
Yeah, you got to be
Yeah,
pretty
the
strapped.
stuff that Ivar does, where he's changing reality around.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and he's got a will of 10, which is technically max, and then he's fucking around with that. And he has to have a will of 10 to make it work. Otherwise, it's just kind of like it can be kind of chancy. And it was like same first session that he had with Barrick, where it was like Barrick kind of loses his mind and Ivar botches the shit out of a reality twist, and then next thing you know, you've got this rift in space-time that's not supposed to be there, causing all kinds of shit.
Right.
And so he completely boogered that one up, and it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I mean, if you're gonna fuck with reality, I'll let you do it, but there's a cost. Always is.
Yeah.
So
And then Swill.
So that needs to be reworked though, right? We actually have some comments about this on our core rule book. So I want to kind of skip over that because I feel like that's going to change.
Well,
Right now
it'll-
it's sexual will, right?
Yeah, it's basically how well can you stave off a seduction, and it does have its genuine place in Shadows. I haven't messed with it much because what you guys are fighting against aren't necessarily like Fae or other dangerous beings that try to use their gyrating vulvas to get everybody's attention. That's more or less kind of the downplay of that one. Like that one's far more specific and a remnant of the game as it was before. And I still may keep it in there as a I may keep it in there as kind of like sort of an older tendency for it's like, hey, for those of us who are still weird that might actually employ this kind of and who might actually do this kind of stuff, it's like you can probably just keep it, but in general I don't really think I need it. Because you could easily argue, hey, if I've got some, if I have this literal holographic anime chick, and it's like it's not that far fetched, especially in this day and age when you've got all these weebs running around. It's one of those things where it's like, if your body pillow literally comes to life and is walking around the house and trying to get you to do crazy shit, and it's like you might. If your confidence is down here, your sanity ain't too great, your will might be the thing that you actually have to really roll against, not necessarily your S-will. And, the S-will thing is just kind of okay, you've resisted it once, it was treated as freebies because you would just knock it down and be like, okay,
Right.
I've resisted it this much. But generally speaking, I think it is just as elastic as what willpower would be.
Well, and maybe that's something that we can workshop in another episode of like, what is the end goal of this? Is it to be because I think sometimes we had talked about like if you had it really high, then you had almost a thirst that you needed to slake, right?
Right. It was in the negatives.
We've
yeah.
Right. So we've looked at it a couple of different ways. I like the concept of there being something that is, because you could have a character who's like, I am a robot. You can't seduce me, right? Like I don't expect Riv's golem to like be seduced by something, but
Really pretty diamond.
But maybe right, who knows? But maybe there's a way of working it out. But
Right.
But yeah, that one is a work in progress. I mean, this is
when we're thinking
you're building it.
Yeah, we're thinking of maybe having advantages and disadvantages that play with that.
Right, that emulate that same thing, because it's easy to say it would be a disadvantage. Although, like, so I could easily throw it in there to the disadvantage of addiction, which is like if you have it like technically a negative S-will in that circumstance, you'd be like, okay, yeah, you got to get laid this many times a day or you're screwed up. It's like that.
Just not in the good way.
Right.
And that could be a flavor of addiction.
Yes. That's a type of addiction. That would be like a level 1 of that addiction would be like at least once. Level 2 would be at least twice, at least 3 times, going on up. It'd be psychotic, you don't want to have like, I got like a level 20 addiction, I got to get laid 20 times. Well, dude, you're going to be at a deficit all the time then. Like,
yeah, right.
Well, and we have other players that have, not other players, other characters that have addiction.
Yeah. So
Um,
let's reorient ourselves here. So someone who's creating a character has a cool concept. They've got an idea for their character, and then they one of the things we didn't talk about is that there's power levels in this game. The power levels is based on um how high your dice rolls will get. So you choose the power level, which is in our CRB, right? And then you roll a bunch of D10s, which is 10-sided dice. You take all these points that you just rolled, right? And all of these stats we've been talking about, your magnetism, your intelligence, your reflex, you start allocating those points based on your character concept. So, going back earlier to what we were talking about, you might have a character that is just absolutely repulsive, but the smartest person in the world, but has absolutely can't deal with tech, right? So just like a straight up wizard, like a wizard that's like gnarled. So you might put all of your points in the intelligence, 0 into tech, 0 into magnetism. You know what I mean? So you get to choose this stuff, right? So then you get another set of points to put into skills, which I think we can take time to talk about those later because the skills are really straightforward. It's the things you see in any other game. It's just like how good are you at fencing, or how good are you at shooting a gun, or
I'd
how
say
good are you at
let's
yeah.
package skills with talking about the synergy system.
Yeah. So we can talk about
Right.
that for a second. So just like any other game, I'm talking from a complete layman, so I'm describing it the way I think
Just
of
like
it.
any other game, which I have not
Just like
played.
yeah, that's why I'm saying it the way I'm. Just like any
Just
other
like
game.
Knights of the Old Republic and any other RPG.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
have skills in certain actions, right? Some of those could be as simple as how well do you how well do you work with explosives, or how well do you are good at like disguising yourself.
Well, all of our attacks, right?
Yeah.
Everything that we do. So there's not a baseline attack. You have like, I'm gonna swing a sword, I'm using the fencing skill or the melee skill. Like
Mhm.
I'm gonna shoot a gun, I'm using the handgun skill, the rifle skill, the submachine gun skill.
So again, your character concept is really, really strong here because you get to choose what your character is good at. Now, we haven't talked about progression, but we will in a while. Not today, probably, but in a while.
Yes, SMG skill.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was
Yep.
3 sessions in before I realized that SMG was submachine gun, and so I just put
As to a
No.
spice that you put on
I
Mongolian
put
food.
0 points into SMG, and then I realized it wasn't Super Mario Girls or something, and then I was like, damn it, I should get some training in this. But the initial character setup is so important because it is expensive to add those new skills later. And yes, you can get a Gat in Shadows. You could be a Gloctopus. You could be a druid that
Octopus.
That's a
can
good
turn into an octopus that has 8 Gatling guns.
Yeah, there's
Oh.
so much like it's like the equipment part of it.
So,
nobody
well-
nobody fucking knows. Nobody.
but what we're trying to say is that any of the skills that you're trying to use, it depends on a certain ability, one of your main abilities that we were just talking about. As an example, let's say that you want to be a badass archer, so you'd get the archery skill. Well, that primary stat is reflexes. It takes reflexes to do a good archery because it's a lot of finesse, right? Well, part of that, and this is something that D came up with, which is I think genius.
Yes.
I gotta stroke the GM a little bit. That's why I'm here. Is that it takes cool, which is one of your core stats, to be able to maintain the finesse that you're doing. And so the reason I'm describing it this way is that that's what we call a synergy. So your main skill in archery is your reflexes, but if you have a high stat in cool, then you're actually going to get an extra bonus on top of that ability. So you could choose that your character is jittery and not cool at all in that way, like they can't keep their cool, but they have high reflexes, and so they'll just be able to shoot the archery just fine. But if something crazy is going on, it's not gonna help them.
They won't have that little edge. And the only way to unlock that synergy bonus is to be trained in that skill. So that training enables you to kind of tap in. So that's why versus the layperson who picks up a gun, anybody can shoot a gun if they can pull the trigger.
Take some scissors.
But right, but it takes that I've been trained on how to do it, so now I can do it much better than an untrained person who is naturally has good hand-eye coordination. What I really like about this, though, is that we spent time and went through and thought about that primary and that synergy, though. So every ranged weapon is not the same. They're not all reflex cool, right? So beam weapons shooting like an energy beam, repulsor ray sort of thing is reflex, but the synergy bonus is on tech, right? Because it's a more complicated machine. You need to understand how to use it. Heavy, the big, grenade, rocket launcher, stuff like that, reflex, but also body, because it is a big, gigantic weapon that you need to be able to hold and use properly. And so, yes, they're all weapons shooting something from a distance, but they require different setups to do. And just because you're good with a handgun doesn't mean you're going to be good with a rocket launcher, as we've seen with Derek.
Yeah. So that's the reason I wanted to go spend some time, just a little bit of time on this, is there's so many skills, you just have to read through them all, but they're all pretty self-explanatory. Most of them are something you'd see useful at some time or another. But so going through this phantom character that someone might be creating, they would choose what skills their character is trained in. The last thing, and I think this is where, we've been talking about what makes Shadows unique in my mind, and we've talked about how the stats you choose really picks, you have your character concept and you can kind of mold your character around that, and then you have the luck, which I think is a super unique system. But when it comes to actually defining your character, there's not many games I've seen that has this much depth in choosing advantages and disadvantages for your character that gives you actual benefits or detriments in the game. Because you could choose, in D&D, I remember you could choose like backgrounds and stuff, right?
Yeah.
That has like pre-built stories for you. Or they even had this thing where you can like roll some dice and it'll say, as a young kid you had this happen. Here's your trauma. Here's your, they have different things, but they just like construct a backstory for you, but it doesn't do anything for you. It might give you a little bit more gold to start off the game, but you know what I mean? It's just like, where were you before you started playing this character? And now you're playing this character and you just do whatever the hell you want. You know what I mean? So describe, the people, anyone watching or anyone listening, describe what an advantage and disadvantage is, D.
So I may end up changing it to what I did with a secondary system eventually, which is like, changing it to perks and flaws. That's what I like. It seems a little bit more easy to remember, but advantages and disadvantages, more or less. Everybody has a kind of a funny culmination of things that they're naturally talented at, or kind of weird advantages, or an edge in their life in certain ways that kind of they're displaced by certain disadvantages or flaws that they have with their own personalities. And so that's what these represent exactly. And it can range from stuff that's super simplistic, like time sense, which is a really minor kind of advantage, but you'd be surprised how often it can come up, where you're kind of always aware of what the hell time it is, even if you don't have access to the sun, a watch, a cell phone. You're just kind of like, it's been this many hours. You may not necessarily even know what time it is per se, but you know how much time has passed. So you're always aware of time going by and what increment it's at, and that's one of the advantages. And similarly, like I was saying beforehand, addiction offers up another kind of disadvantage, where it could be something minor, like maybe you're just smoking cigarettes and you just got to have your smoke a day, that kind of stuff at the very least, a little dose of nicotine. Or it could be something that kind of gets pushed up, to where it's like this major addiction where you have to have something really potent. It's like I can't do shit unless I'm fucked up, people. It's like it's a really hardcore case of alcoholism or heroin or any of that. Yeah. So, that's kind of what it's for. Is it rounds the character out, kind of in a sense. After talking to a friend of mine about this a while back, is that it's probably the most proper terminology. You kind of enter into a contract with your GM whenever you take these things. Like the advantage is kind of a like duh, like yeah, oh cool, I get to have this. It's kind of neat. The disadvantages is kind of the contractual part of it, which is like, hey, even it's like the character concept that you have, you need to follow these particular points, because if he's a screwed up mess in these certain areas, we're going to hold you to that. And it basically makes the character a challenge, but it adds a sense of realism that really brings them. Yeah, it really makes them three-dimensional instead of just something fictional.
And I think that's part of what, I've said it before, and I'll continue saying it, makes this game work so well is it is collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
Like probably the most collaborative dice-based game that I've played, where yes, the game master has an idea of what they want to do. They have to plan a little bit ahead. It can't always be freestyling it, right? But they also are working with the players to make a good experience for those characters. Even again, if that experience isn't necessarily in the best interest of the character's health.
Yeah.
It's an extremely fun and interactive process. So if we were, making characters and we weren't communicating with each other, you would get that like Gish character where it's like, I want to be the absolute best at ranged and up close combat and use all the best spells and blah blah blah. And I've got level 20 Vorpal sword of slaying and whatever, and you're like, great, you have that. You win. Nobody wants to play with you.
Well,
congratulations.
You played yourself.
You beat Shadows. You're done. The rest of us are gonna play.
Yeah.
Whereas you have this collaboration where you're like, and some of the advantages are, I have connections, right? So that's always in other games I've played. That's been this dubious thing where it's like, you're a level 4 fighter. You have 4 followers, and it's like, what does that mean? Oh, they're like NPC lackeys that follow you around and like, take care of my horse, go buy me a beer, like whatever.
Yeah.
But in this, you have connections. And so it's like, we need to, from a metagaming standpoint, we need to advance the plot point. And I'll go, how do I advance the plot point? Hey, I have connections who work for the feds. Let me call that connection. Or I have connection who runs an occult bookstore. Let me call that connection and see if we can do something extraordinary. Or we through the course of the game, and Drew has been really good about this, an event happens to the characters and he said, I'm going to take on that disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a thing that happened to my character. And he's got combat paralysis now because his whole world got wrecked and he almost died twice, like got pulled back from the brink of death twice, and he's like hesitant now to go into combat. So he takes the disadvantage and we play that out.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I want to point out from a layman, someone who hasn't played a lot of dice rolling games, is that a lot of times whenever I've built a character for like D&D, I have no connection to that character at all. It's just
right.
I made a rogue, I made a paladin, and I chose
the party needed a rogue, so I made a rogue.
Yeah, even then I'm not even that nice. I just like, I'm gonna make a character, whatever, But anything when it comes to humans, we're all built off of our flaws. There's the things that are exemplified and people that like idealize different attributes or advantages. But for me, I always had the most fun whenever I was making a character in Shadow, choosing the disadvantages. Let's talk about some of the advantages that you can, or disadvantages you can choose. Some of them are really basic, like you're a liar. You're gonna lie all the time. Another one is like you have enemies. So before the game started, you have someone who might be coming after you. The DM could pick that person to attack you at an inopportune time, and they know your weaknesses, right? You could be dependent on something. You could be a pyromaniac, so your character might be someone who wants to set fire to things all the time, right?
My character is stubborn and overconfident, which they're minor, but it means the way I play it is I always start a battle using my like, I'm not gonna kick on the magic thing. I'm not gonna get out the big gun. I'm going with the regular bullets and the handgun because I'm pretty sure I could take this guy. And then so I always have like that quote unquote like wasted turn because you're like,
You
no,
just
no,
fire
no.
at them.
These are like flying vampires that are shooting laser beams out of their face. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that my Miltech Avenger is gonna do it with its regular ass bullet. And then I fire, and then I find it didn't work, and then I'm
It
like,
didn't work.
okay,
Yeah.
I guess I'll switch to the cool bullets. Nope, didn't work. Okay, I guess I'm getting the plasma rifle. Like, and I still don't learn, right? So it's like next combat comes up, and I'm like, but I'm pretty sure this one I can take out if I, And
Yeah.
I love those. And then
Yeah.
we get like the big, heavy, danger magnet, monster magnet, things like that, where the GM has to be really involved because
You're gonna get a lot of encounters if you choose
you're
that.
gonna start drawing things to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you have like pain sensitive, where you functionally operate as one level of pain, higher than your regular level, and pain impacts all of your D10 rolls, right? So instead
Yeah.
of being a D10 plus 5, you're a D10 plus 4 if you have that first level of pain. That can really tip a fight.
Yeah.
Once players get injured, it gets harder and harder for them to be successful.
Yeah. Well, and speaking from
You could take unlucky, right? We talked about how valuable luck is.
Yeah.
I'm like
Unlucky.
playing on hard mode.
So
Yeah.
luck is, instead of it being, 2 points to reroll, it's 4 points, right? Like that'll
You
burn
only get like
through
two.
really fast.
You only get two
Yeah.
rerolls in a per session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the ones I just used in the most recent 2 sessions ago was Riv's phobia. I chose a phobia which was spiders, and I took that
Right.
just from my real life. I guess I'm fascinated by spiders, but if they're ever like out of a cage and were crawling at me, that's when I scream like just a banshee, like "Ah!" Like
Right.
no, none of that. So, but in the game, something very spider-like showed up, and I actually had to do a sanity check. I asked D, the GM. I was like, "Hey, my character's has a phobia of spider. I think that she's gonna have to check her sanity," and she just barely passed it. But I still played that out, so I got to do that little bit of role playing there. So I guess what I'm trying to say is these disadvantages and advantages let you really flesh out your character. If you already had a good character concept, is like these things up and down. You
Yeah.
shut up, Radical. I do not. Spiders are not cute if they're out of their cages.
Yeah.
Bye,
But-
friend of Hagrid.
But yeah, and I think that if you're ever going to do like expansions to this game, more advantages and disadvantages, I think would be really fun.
Yeah, I could fill books and books and books of that stuff. Some of the stuff is
Yeah.
what's in there right now as a baseline. There's so many powerful combinations of different things that have been made. Like I still haven't seen anybody. What's funny is that somebody did try to min-max it, and funny enough, they figured out a way to min-max it a little bit because Shadows is pretty resilient against that. But what they did, yeah. It's pretty resilient against min-maxing, but what I saw somebody do is that they took a rather profoundly different approach, and they utilized the advantages in just such a way that they more or less had superpowers because their advantages were stacked so high. So instead of having like cybernetics and the rest of it, they kind of had like this John Wick thing happen where they were just fucking good at a lot of shit.
Oh, just plot armor.
Yeah, just a lot of crap. So they were lucky. They had like high rate of high healing factor and a whole they really racked and stacked a lot of that. And that's the one area that you can definitely go kind of baller on. But he was like, I could really do this. I'm like, yeah, yep, you can
Well,
really
what
do
I
that.
Did kind of a little bit was my character has had missing limbs, has had limbs amputated. But I bought the very expensive what is it, cybernetic savant or whatever it's called.
Yeah, it's cyberprothetical.
Cyberprothetical. So it I don't suffer humanity loss. My character doesn't suffer humanity loss for adding cybernetics. So, yes, my arm and leg did get blown off prior to the character joining, but he had them replaced with cybernetic limbs, and since then has had several other, cybernetic replacements. But definitely that is like an emotional pain point for him, is that he misses his right arm, like, and it doesn't quite feel like he's got the one there.
Right. Well, and the other thing too is that the humanity loss comes into it because anything that fractures your sanity down is a really, like I said, the lack of reliability. Ooh, man! Like, you get a character who's unreliable, it is punishment, because they'll do all kinds of crazy shit. They become sort of untenable or unplayable. It's kind of it's kind of like traditional, like, I hate to bring it up in this particular fashion, but it's like those old-fashioned, like, conditions you'd run into in the old Final Fantasy games, where it's like, I'm confused, I hit my own people on accident. Like,
right.
It's that kind of stuff, but way matured, a lot more matured.
It's all just, again, it adds flavor to it, and it works when people are willing to work it. So if they're looking at it from a min-max perspective, again, it's just,
I love munchkins though. That's my favorite treat to eat. I really love munchkins.
Bet.
I especially whenever they try to, it's like, I got this, and they try to break the system, and they're like, I didn't know that could happen. Whenever I throw them into a situation that they literally can't handle, so it's because you only put your character in like one direction. This is not a standard game where you can sit there and be like, okay, that one direction literally means you've conquered all of it. Like, nope. You have to be like, it's just as chaotic as real life. You have to think about it that way.
Well, and then there's always, you can't max out every stat, because eventually it becomes so expensive. So after this is all in character creation that we're adding these things. But then we have on the advancement side, after that session 0, where advantages, disadvantages, they all cost different amounts of points. So the advantage that lets you be, color, or like the disadvantage that makes you colorblind, is not as significant a penalty as the one that says you have cyber allergy and you can never get cyberware ever.
Right. And cyber allergy sucks.
Or you cannot tell a lie. You have to be compulsively honest.
Faultlessly honest.
Those are a much higher cost than the one that's like, you have an enemy, or you're poor, or you're lazy, right? And so to add, and similarly on the advantages side, we have like the absolute end-all be-all one, unburnable, which means you can cast magic with 0 chance of paradox.
Mm-hmm. Which is the highest advantage there is. Yeah.
Is a 40-point advantage. So basically, if you were creating a character from the start, you could buy that advantage and that's it.
Yeah.
Like that's, that would be your only thing. And that could be a really cool character concept.
Yeah.
You could be this otherwise like innocent, whatever, like, babe in the woods sort of character that has no other really defining traits, except you are this magical savant and you cast it kind of outside of the normal space-time situation. But if you want to add advantages later, they get very expensive. Mm-hmm. Because why, at the age of 35, when you've been doing this for 10 years, do you suddenly magically get the ability to see people's auras or whatever? Like, suddenly you can make trick shots. You have a photographic memory. Like, how did that happen, right? And so you can slowly build those points up over time after each session. And then I think we all do a pretty good justification for adding an advantage or for improving an advantage.
Yeah, anytime that you guys have been like, thrown against a certain situation where it was, where you failed or things didn't turn out well, and then you came back from it and was like, I'm a little fucked up after that, and then you guys throw yourselves into a disadvantage. More often than not, though, because you guys can pick it out, absolutely, and like if you're If your GM's kind of like, okay, that makes sense, they'll usually go along with it. Or the GM usually will be the one that ascribes some of these things. They might even just gift, like, that's kind of the other leverage that the GM has in this too, is that they can kind of go, like it's the one thing in the character advancement pool that doesn't require them to buy it. Something could happen where it's like, man, you've been pulling this off, your rolls have been really great, something just kind of happened, and it's like, I just don't want them to not have this anymore. And they'll go like, you get this advantage, man, just here it is, gifted. But it's kind of a rare circumstance, but it can happen. The GM can do that, just like a GM can say, like, look, you keep screwing this up, or this keeps happening, he's got this until you more or less buy it off. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Well, and we've had events where it's like, you all made an enemy.
yeah.
Like you did some stuff, it didn't go well for you.
It's like in the top right of our
now-
game, it said he will remember that.
Yeah.
Right. You now have an enemy, and you add that enemy on your disadvantages. That's a thing. Or you made a connection. You really helped somebody out. You forged a new path in this game. Like, okay, now you've got that, and you have that connection, that lever that you can pull, at a later time to try and accomplish something.
Yeah,
So,
it's fun.
They're
We'll
all
stuff.
cool.
probably wrap up here because we're just wrapping up against the hour here.
Ken has time sense. It's an advantage he took early on. So I think advantages and disadvantages. My takeaway from it is great in character creation, but it also serves this longer term purpose that I think a perks and flaws system that I've seen in other games tends to be only during character creation. Right? I've seen only in character creation, you have a club foot, but you're a trick shot, great, done. And then nothing else happens after that. But for this, I think that is a unique element of this game that helps your characters to really grow over time. And it doesn't mean that after 3 years of playing, your character is just a hot mess of like godlike invincibility, but also you have halitosis and you're balding and like everybody loves you or hates you. But I think you do tend toward those extremes eventually.
Yeah, it's just the development is so damn organic. Like,
Yeah.
it's I don't know. It's like it's probably one of the more interesting questions I'm going to end up facing throughout these podcasts. Is like, hey, how do you know what to throw against your players? And I'm kind of going like, ooh, okay, that's a good one. That's a good question because it's kind of an instinctual thing, and it's not an easy question because when you're dealing with something that is so flexible, it's like, how do you
Right.
really do that? And there's a couple of principles involved, but it is a complicated thing. But you will figure it out because this shit gets so addictive. It's just hard not to do it.
All right, Ken, what's your big salient point from the evening?
Be salient. You're muted, dude.
You're muted.
It's gone. I'm almost gone. No, I really like this system because it feels like you're actually building a person as opposed to a character on a sheet. Like the all of this character creation stuff, you can come to the game with a stupid, let me put that a different way, with a simple idea. Like I said last time, my simple idea was like, I don't know, Garen from League of Legends, and you can make it into something. I remember, I think we added that he had the couldn't tell a lie disadvantage, that he's super righteous to the point, and even during the small sessions that we had with that came as a problem because we were trying to some subterfuge, and he was like, nope, this is what's happening. Like, it hurts.
Yeah, Andrew plays a character like that in our other game.
This. I think that the hardest part is, I can talk about it all day, but there's just so much cool stuff in the text that you have to get someone to like get into the CRB, the core rulebook, and just start looking at all the different skills we have and all the different advantages and disadvantages. And you start thinking about some of these advantages and disadvantages, just as a final point, makes you think, right? It makes you think about how your character is going to approach certain situations. You know, if you have a spirit guide, you could have someone, the GM can tell you stuff. If you have a, if you are intolerant, let's say that, you're intolerant to cybernetics, or people who have like, what's
Oh,
the
you
word I'm
mean
looking
like
for?
bigoted intolerance, not like
Yeah.
lactose intolerance.
No, you have a hatred for something specific. You're intolerant. So, maybe one of the people you're
Yeah.
working with
Yeah,
has
yeah.
like for example, if Riv was intolerant of cybernetics, she might have a completely different attitude towards Barrick, you know?
Right.
So stuff like that helps
Which is
me
where this
because
thing's like, I'm gonna get the skin-looking cybernetics because I want to hide because I'm ashamed.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
it's stuff like that like even for myself from session to session, I look over at my disadvantages and advantages, and I try to come up with like, well, what would my character be wanting to do here? Because to be honest, and I told Angela, one of my friends and my roommate, about this, that I'm bad at role playing. I'm bad at it. So I look at my character sheet and I try to say, okay, well, she's impulsive, and then literally in my head I was like, okay, well, what's the first thing that came to my head in this situation? I'm gonna do that. You know what I mean? As opposed to thinking about like, well, okay, what's the funniest thing, or what's the hardest thing, or what's the coolest thing? I was just like, no, she just jump after him. Let's go after it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Being able to play to your strengths definitely counts, yeah. And that's the reason why it should be a collaborative effort. It should be everybody together, the GM tying it all up so that everybody can like get in there, get invested, and even if they're not entirely certain or sure that this is going to be right for them, you can be like, okay, what do you really want though? And the GM can basically, it's like, let's fluff up the things that you want to keep in here, and you just experiment with this, and you'll see how it goes along. And I don't know, it just kind of plays along a certain principle of that I've always done since I was a GM, which is like, I'm here to facilitate consequence only, but more than that, I want to be as entertaining in this whole process as possible. And the only way to do that is to collaborate. You can't, like, you become antagonistic, the game turns into a weird, difference between like Destiny 2 and League of Legends, man. Like,
As far as the community goes,
yeah, just like there's a sense of collaboration on one end and a sense of like I'm gonna shit on your chest and piss on your face, and like
even when
it's
you're
like,
on the same team.
yeah, like
It's like, oh my god, you took one of my minions. I'm going to kill you.
yeah,
Gotta get those league points.
yeah, hyper toxicity, man, so bad.
Yeah. I think that'll do it for this evening. Do you want to get the last word in there, D, to end the session?
Well, I
Fuck
mean,
League of Legends.
yeah,
That's yeah.
yeah, I mean, like I tried doing it. So I guess I'll just leave it with like I want to keep doing these podcasts. I want to keep bringing this out, and to everybody who's watching, awesome. I want to keep this going, and we're gonna keep doing it. And I'm getting some stuff together so I can continue to keep moving on. And these guys are also like some of the best. I'm gonna end up working with them, and we're gonna get the CRB thing moving. So I don't have much else other than that. It's just that we're gonna keep on moving, and I can't wait to see how it goes. Oh, and I'm putting this Patreon thing together too. So hopefully,
Like and subscribe.
I'm just hoping to
Smash
get to
that
a
like
point
button.
where I can have
Hit
some
the-
people out there. They're like, hey,
The widget.
yeah, it's like they're over here, think this, that. This more like
I love watching old YouTube videos with like, just remember to hit the bell, and it's like the bell's down here now.
yeah,
If you want to see more, the way to make that happen is to give us your feedback, join
They're
our
gonna say, "Give
Discord,
us your
have a
money."
I totally thought he was
conversation
gonna
with
say,
us.
"Give us your money."
give us your money. No, give us feedback, give us conversation. Make it be part of the process. This is like the pre-Kickstarter, right? Instead of the Kickstarter where they're like, we have this idea, and then everyone's like, great, I paid $20, give it to me now. We're like, no, we're building this thing. Tell us what you want to see in a system that you don't already have in another system, that part that you're missing, and help make this stand-up
God.
thing. Raid Shadow.
Yeah, I'm just getting like flashbacks to everything I fucking watch.
Maybe we should not involve people in the chat. I don't know. Talk about toxic community.
Okay, curtains.
Well, yeah, like I said, that's pretty much where I'm gonna keep pushing, and I'm gonna make it work somehow. So That's all there
Glad we
is.
could be entertaining.
Yep. Take it easy.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.